From the News Channel 5 Network, this is OpenLine.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to OpenLine. I'm Carrie Sharp. Thank you so much for being with us tonight. We have a topic that I think a lot of people, well, I know it's affecting a lot of people. If you just look at the numbers, the opioid epidemic, it is disheartening, it is heartbreaking, and it is dangerous and is deadly, and it is right here in Tennessee in full force. I have Representative Cameron Sexton from Crossville here with me tonight to talk about this issue that is affecting so many Tennesseans. And we're not just talking about the folks who are dealing with the opioid addiction, but their families as well. And there's a task force of lawmakers trying to tackle this and come up with the best way to deal with it. Thank you, first of all, for being here.
Thank you for having me.
I want to remind our viewers, this is OpenLine. It means it's your chance to call in, ask questions, tell us about your experience with the opioid epidemic, what you know about it, what you've learned about it, and of course any solutions that you think would be good. So it is your chance to call. We have that number on the screen, 615-737+. Go ahead, give us a call. We'll get those calls lined up. We'd love to hear from you tonight. But in the meantime, I want to know more about this task force. You guys have been formed for a little bit less than a year now. Tell me about who's on this task force and what's the goal? Right.
Speaker Harwell formed the task force. You just have to look at the numbers to see the opioid problem in the state of Tennessee. And Speaker Pro Tem Curtis Johnson is the chair, and she put me as the health chairman on the task force. The judicial chairman, William Lamberth, is on it. Dr. Kumar is one of the physicians who's on it, who represents Robertson County up north from here. And then Representative Powers, who's from La Follette, who has a lot of issues with Suboxone and some other issues in his area. So she tried to make it members from across the state who had issues and who serve on different committees that you would hear the legislation.
And you guys are speaking to experts in this field, of people who are dealing with the opioid epidemic firsthand. But again, what's the goal? What do you hope maybe months from now, a year from now, comes out of this task force?
Right. Well, you know, there's no easy fix. That's the first thing. Yeah. We're not going to legislate our way out of this process. So anything that we look to pass, we just have to make sure that long term we're doing what's beneficial. The goal is to talk to the experts, talk to the people in the community, talk to people who live it every day, so that we have a better understanding of exactly what the families are going through. It's one thing to talk to an expert who's a physician who may be involved in an association. It's quite different to talk to a family who's been harmed by it, or an individual.
So many families here in Tennessee have a story to tell. And I think that we need to say this opioid epidemic isn't one class of people. It's not one zip code of people. It really stretches all across Tennessee. I think I was reading every county has had a drug overdose death just in the past couple of years. Every single county is seeing this. Right.
It knows no economic boundaries. It doesn't matter if you're rich or poor, middle class, whatever. It affects everybody. And part of it too is it's also bigger picture is addiction, you know, and today it's opioids. You can see heroin moving in. Heroin has tripled in the last 3 years, the usage of heroin. So what you've seen is it's a problem. It's opioids now, but also as a task force, we're having to look in the future as how do we battle addiction and treatment?
Because when certain drugs start becoming unavailable because they're such in the news and police are after them and we all, you know, the spotlight is being shown on them, then it moves to something else. And the goal is to stay ahead of that and really be able to help people. And, you know, we throw around these terms like opioid and people are like, well, I kind of know what that is, but I don't know what it is. It's a painkiller and it's prescribed. And a lot of this started with people going to the doctor in pain or dealing with mental issues, and they were getting these drugs lawfully.
Right.
I mean, doctors were giving them, and it was a good thing to help them, but they're very addictive.
They are very addictive, and what I will tell you too, though, is in 2001, the General Assembly, you know, over a decade ago, passed something called the Intractable Pain Act, which kind of started Tennessee on this platform. Before then, in 2001, we only had 422 drug overdose. Since that time, we're up to 1,600.
Wow.
We repealed that law 2 years ago, but what that law did is it allowed the patients to turn down alternative treatments other than pain medications. It forced physicians to tell the patient if they weren't going to prescribe opioids, who would prescribe them opioids. You know, so what it allowed to do, it allowed it to blossom and became basically what pain became is a fifth vital sign, which is you hear a lot. And when it's a fifth vital sign, and that act told the physician that they could treat that patient until that patient felt no pain as long as it took. And so it set up a process that we're having to live through today of not looking at the consequences of what would happen. And so that's one example how sometimes legislation, whether it was good or bad, the intention, what happened in the next 16 years, NAS babies, neonatal abstinence syndrome babies who are addicted to opioids from the mother has increased 1,000% since 2001. So you can look at one piece of legislation potentially that has led us or expedited us to get to this point today.
And that legislation has been repealed or is in the process?
Repealed. We repealed it 2 years ago because there's such an outcry from district attorneys, from physicians and providers about what they were having to do. Not only that, as soon as that bill passed, within a year to 2 years, 300 pain clinics popped up in the state of Tennessee. That legislation also allowed the physician to hire physician assistants or people who were working with them so they could have multiple and the physician wouldn't have to be there anymore. So it created a lot of problems that we've had to deal with.
Tell me also about what else you guys are trying to do. What are you narrowing in on? What are you focusing in on as steps you can do that may make a difference? I know you said you can't legislate your way out of this problem. But what are you looking at doing?
Well, I mean, I think in the end, you can do a lot of stuff that looks great on paper. So you can do education, you can do awareness, you can reduce the number of prescriptions that can be written out of the emergency room. You can require physicians to be in pain clinics more than 50% of the time. All great things and all beneficial. We've passed things that started licensing pain clinics a few years ago. Before, they were never licensed, so you didn't know where they were or what they were doing. We started updating the controlled substance database more frequently on a daily basis so providers have the most up-to-date information, and due to that, doctor shopping has decreased by 60% in the state of Tennessee.
They can see where someone else has been.
That's right. And so when you talk to the Department of Health, they can go in and look at that and see what physicians really are a pill mill, because they can see people driving there and then driving home to get the prescription. So we made a lot of inroads in trying to reduce it, but at the end of the day, the real issue is what kind of treatment that we can get these people, and mental health assistance. Because as you said earlier, with mental health, a lot of times they use the pain medicines to mask their symptoms because they get such a euphoria, they feel better. But it really makes the case worse for them. And so whatever solution we do, we can do a lot of things that look great. At the end of the day, it's really about treating mental health more effectively in the state of Tennessee and doing treatment longer than a 60-day detox program.
Well, for sure. And I know when it comes to folks dealing with things like depression and anxiety and mood disorders, that chunk of people are being prescribed these opioids at an alarming rate when you compare it to the rest of the population. So that really you do have to focus in, but yet you also run the risk of stigmatizing an already stigmatized population when you do focus in.
Well, I mean, there is a stigma there. People will tell you there's a stigma for substance abuse, regardless of what that is. There's a stigma for mental health, which is crazy that there's a stigma. Tennessee, we did the 3-Star Project where we traveled the state not too long ago, and what we found out is Tennessee is getting involved in mental health at the worst possible time, which is the highest cost, which is when they're in the emergency room and they're having an episode. If we were getting it in on the front end where we could help them, where they would be able to stay employed, where they would be able to get help, where they would be able to stay with their families, not at the time when you're having to pull someone out of the family, take them to the emergency room, or they commit crimes and they go to the penitentiary. Because when you look at the county jails with mental health, over 70% of them have a mental illness diagnosis. In the state prison, over a third of the population is mental health. This issue really, what you said is, when you look at the stats in America, 50% of the opioid prescriptions in America are for people who have a mental health issue, whether anxiety or depression for the most part. And that's serious. So that's where we get back to is it's the supply is not the opioid. A lot of times you hear people say, well, we got to take the supply away. The supply is not the drug, because the next day it will be heroin or it could be something else. The supply are the people. We have to figure out how to help the people get better and put them on a path to where they can make those decisions and not have a rebound and go back into addiction. But to do that, we have to be willing to spend some money in the front end to save money long term.
And when you start talking about taxpayer dollars, that's where things start to get tricky, right?
It does. Well, what I will tell you though is when you look at how much money this has caused the state of Tennessee, Comptroller Wilson did a study. It's probably $1 billion of taxpayers' money when you factor in Department of Children's Services and having to take the children. When you look at Department of Health, when you look at TennCare, when you look at Department of Mental Health, when you look at the corrections. So when you look at the budget as a whole, the question really is, are we wanting to spend $1 billion in all these other government programs, or are we wanting to spend it in health to make someone better so we don't have to continually spend that down the road?
Yeah, that is the big question of the night. We are talking about the opioid epidemic. We would love for you to chime in. Go ahead and give us a call during the break. We have a couple of phone lines open. 615-737-PLUS is the number to call if you feel compelled. Share your own story. We've got an hour to talk about it. Stay right here.